Valero Energy Corporation's leader Lane Riggs wasn't holding back during an April 2025 call with investors. He described California's regulatory setup as the strictest on the continent. Just weeks following that statement, Valero announced they'd be pulling the plug on their Benicia facility. This plant produces roughly 170,000 barrels daily, supplying approximately 9% of what California needs. The shutdown hits hard for the 400 employees whose livelihoods depend on this operation. Since opening its doors in 1969 and coming under Valero's ownership in 2000, the plant has been running continuously. After a quarter century of ownership, they're calling it quits come April 2026. Adding insult to injury, California slapped Valero with an $82 million penalty in October 2024. This represents the largest sanction ever issued by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. The fine stemmed from 21 years of emission infractions going back to 2003. For context, Chevron's previous record penalty stood at $14 million. Valero's punishment was almost 6 times larger. Half a year after receiving that massive penalty, Riggs addressed the circumstances during a subsequent earnings discussion. He referenced the state's 2-decade push toward eliminating fossil fuel dependency, creating this extraordinarily difficult regulatory climate. He noted specifically that the Benicia plant sits in one of California's most regulation-heavy zones, and keeping that operation functional demands significantly higher costs than normal. Valero actually recorded a massive $1.1 billion impairment hit for their California operations. This signals these assets have suffered a permanent value reduction, not merely a temporary decline. Of that staggering $1.1 billion figure, $900 million applied exclusively to Benicia. The facility, which required hundreds of millions in investment, has now lost $900 million in worth. $1 billion value destruction from a single site is truly mind-boggling. During the first quarter of 2025, the corporation posted an overall loss of $595 million, with $530 million directly attributed to refining operations. Their refining profit margins fell almost 30% compared to the previous year. Riggs provided additional details about their obstacles, emphasizing again that keeping Benicia operational was drastically more expensive than preferable. In executive language, this translates to millions in annual excess expenses. The cost comparison is quite revealing when examining maintenance requirements. Something requiring $5 million in Texas might balloon to $8 million in California. The recent sequence of events paints a clear picture. Regulators imposed the $82 million penalty in October, and between November and March, the company evaluated their choices. By April, they reached the difficult decision to declare the facility's closure. While they omitted mentioning that substantial fine in the announcement, there's no question that $82 million fundamentally alters the equation. The Benicia facility's workforce of approximately 400 people consists of highly qualified professionals. With typical earnings of $95,000 annually, these positions include operators, engineers, safety experts, and maintenance personnel. It's quite sobering considering 25 years of critical expertise disappearing. From the municipality's perspective, Benicia depends substantially on Valero. The facility generates 20% of the city's budget, equating to $12 million from a $60 million total. This represents a major portion when accounting for property levies, utility charges, and various business taxes. When Valero departs, that's 1/5 of municipal income simply vanishing. Mayor Steve Young characterized this development as profoundly affecting the whole community, emphasizing the urgency for municipal action since 12 months passes quickly when confronting such an economic crisis. During an earnings discussion, Rich Walsh, Valero's executive vice president, observed that California seemed genuinely interested in preventing the shutdown, but stressed the complexity of the regulatory and policy landscape. This essentially captures how leadership views California operations. It's simply not a worthwhile market. When the notion of partnering with California to maintain Benicia's operations surfaced, executives confirmed ongoing talks, but nothing concrete has emerged from those conversations. They acknowledged what they termed a Hail Mary scenario possibility, though it sounded more like closure was inevitable. The financial consequences reach beyond just the closure declaration. Following the quarterly disclosure, Valero's stock fell 1.6% as investors responded to the $595 million losses and the bleak California regulatory forecast by dumping shares. It's important to recognize, though, that Valero isn't financially troubled overall. They run 15 refineries globally, processing 3.2 million barrels daily, and they're profitable in locations like Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and even the United Kingdom. The problem exists exclusively with California. Riggs emphasized that none of this indicates insufficient demand. Californians still require gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel for aircraft. The demand certainly exists. Now let's examine what's transpired with Valero and California's petroleum industry. The chief financial officer, Gary Simmons, recently discussed some difficulties they've encountered and noted that their losses connect to intensive maintenance operations at their facilities. Maintaining operations in California demands considerably more resources compared to elsewhere. Consider that Benicia facility, which has turned into something of a financial drain. And that substantial $82 million fine, that covers violations spanning from 2003 through 2018, 15 years of excessive emissions. The hydrogen infrastructure was releasing more substances than permitted, and inspectors discovered this during a 2019 examination. Valero didn't voluntarily disclose this. They were discovered during the inspection. It truly emphasizes the harsh environment that CEO Riggs referenced, not merely regarding regulations, but also strict enforcement. There's also Travis Air Force Base, which depends on the Benicia facility for jet fuel through a dedicated pipeline. With the facility approaching closure, the military installation faces a predicament because, as Riggs stated, conducting operations in California has become excessively challenging. When questioned about Valero's other facility in Wilmington near Los Angeles, he mentioned they're examining some strategic options. This facility produces 135,000 barrels daily, representing 5% of the state's gasoline. Should both facilities ultimately close, California would forfeit 14% of its gasoline manufacturing. Riggs indicated that the Wilmington location costs less to maintain than Benicia, but he remained vague about its prospects. In business terminology, strategic options often suggest considering shutdowns or divestments. This naturally raises concerns. Examining Valero's other installations reveals a striking difference. Their Port Arthur facility in Texas processes 400,000 barrels daily, and their St. Charles facility in Louisiana handles 340,000 barrels, both considerably larger and profitable with expansion plans. Meanwhile, California facilities appear to be deteriorating. Phillips 66 closed their Los Angeles facility in October 2024, and Marathon converted their Martinez location into renewable diesel. Now Valero plans to terminate Benicia, making it 4 significant facility closures or conversions within 5 years. That's 20% of California's refining capacity vanished. The state now imports 30% of its gasoline. Following these closures, that figure might climb to 40%, meaning additional costs since transporting it from locations like Asia or South America increases expenses. California's gasoline prices are remarkably elevated, averaging $4.34 per gallon, while the national average sits at $2.90. It's quite striking. The CEO of Valero, Lane Riggs, clarified during a recent earnings discussion that departing California isn't an abrupt choice. It's been developing for quite some time. Over the past 20 years, the state has promoted policies targeting reduced fossil fuel dependence, and those accumulated obstacles have forced them to this conclusion. Valero dedicated months considering their alternatives, converting to renewable diesel, partially terminating operations, or transferring ownership to another operator, but none of these approaches made economic sense. Riggs characterized California's operational climate as the most restrictive and difficult in North America, which essentially meant every alternative was unfeasible. When Valero acquired the Benicia facility in 2000, California hosted 11 major refineries. By April 2026, only 6 will remain operational when Benicia ceases operations. It's remarkable that after 25 years of attempting to succeed, Valero has invested hundreds of millions, employed thousands, and paid billions in levies, all to supply 9% of California's gasoline. In exchange, they received the largest penalty ever in the Bay Area and an operational climate that Riggs found unmanageable. Their announcement included the typical corporate courtesies, acknowledging they recognize the consequences this closure brings for employees, partners, and the community, but the implicit message is unmistakable. California has become excessively demanding, excessively expensive, and simply excessively impractical. Other industry companies are certainly watching closely, and if Valero, a dominant force in the refining sector, cannot achieve success in California, then why would anyone else believe they could? When Benicia terminates operations in April 2026, 400 families will be without employment. The city will